Hello. I'm here today with the Tier 10 British aircraft carrier, the Audacious, in a continuation of our re-review of the Tier 10 carriers for the upcoming Clan Battles season, which of course does feature an aircraft carrier, more than likely on either team. We're on the map Northern Lights, and the mode is Domination. Now starting off in the Audacious, she is of course the youngest of the 3 Tier 10s currently available. So how does she stack up? Well, if you watched my midway video, you know she's a bit on the weaker side compared to the other two, especially in a competitive setting. However, in random battles, her weaknesses are not as prominent, but we will go over them nevertheless. Starting off with her attack planes, of course, we have a 3x3 setup of the Westland Wyvern. You'll note the extremely high hit point pool for an attack plane squadron, at just shy of 25,000 with 9 planes. Compare this to the Hikaryu's rocket squadron, which I believe with a similar 3x3 setup has about 19,000 health, and you'll note that each of the Audacious's planes are substantially tankier. They do pay for this, however, in terms of speed. Note that I'm cruising at about 143 knots when I'm moving in a straight line, without any ducks and dips and turns. There are no destroyers in this game, interestingly enough, which is a bit of an oddity in terms of random battles, but might well be what you should expect in clan battles. There might be 1 or even 0 destroyers depending on the composition the enemy decides to run. Hit 22 rockets there on that Buffalo, which is an exceptional strike. We'll get back to that in a bit. I probably should have just F'd out immediately because it doesn't look like I'm going to have the hit points to continue on. But as you saw there, the rockets are capable, theoretically, of extremely high damage. However, they are limited by their armor penetrative capacity. They only have 28 mils of penetration. And so as a result, they are largely unable to penetrate any heavy targets. Battleships, for example, with the 32mm extremities plate, will be completely resistant to rocket damage outside of fires and in the superstructure, which is 19mm. Certain cruisers, a la Stalingrad or Moskva, for example, but even, say, the midsection of a Des Moines, the Tier 10 counterpart to this Buffalo that I struck before, will resist the penetration of the rockets in that 30mm section. Skimming the Buffalo there with 4 bombs for about 7,500, which seems not that bad, but that is basically the equivalent of landing 3 midway HEDBs, and, well, I launched 16 bombs, so you can see the size of that reticle. The level bombers are similarly a problem. Now, they also have a bit of a penetration power problem. Unlike the Midway's HEDBs, which pen for 67 mils of armor, or pen through 67 mils of armor, and the Tiny Tims on the Midway, which pen through 68 millimeters of armor, the level bombs of the Audacious are comparatively tame. They only penetrate through 41mm of armor, which of course does cause some problems when there are ships like the Kremlin with her 60mm plates, the GK with her 50mm plates, as well as the Moskva and Stalingrad, which will be mainstays of the competitive meta game, more than likely, with their 60mm plates as well. So unlike the HE dive bombers of the Midway, which can basically hit whatever they want at will, the Audacious has to be extremely picky with her already limited armament. The large reticle of the bomber does mean that it's difficult to get consistent hits onto targets that are not moving, or even moving at all, or that are moving rather. And even if you do get hits, there's no guarantee that you'll get penetrations into the right parts of the superstructure. In the case of hitting a Stalingrad, for example, to score a flood on that rune, but he wasn't exactly moving. Score a flood, which means I will try and go back with the rockets. However, unlike the Bearcats or even the Hikaryu rockets, which would be able to speed their way there, I have very slow rocket planes. Even boosted up, I only have about 184 knots of speed, so unlike the 221 knot Bearcats, for example, I'm going to have a bit more trouble getting back to the target and stacking dot damage. Now I do have fairly short arm time, so I have a good reaction time. compared to the other two. The Tiny Tims, for example, would need a nice straight level lineup, so if I had gotten the angle wrong there, wouldn't have been able to get that strike off. In addition, unlike the A8Ms of the Hakuryu, which have fairly sluggish turning circle, the Western Wyvern actually has quite an excellent turning circle. Hitting this rune covered in 27mm plates, with my 28mm pen rockets able to set a double fire and chunk him quite significantly. But remember, it's all fire damage, which means if he survives to get a heal off, that damage is all healable. So in random battles, dealing dot damage is not nearly so bad, but in clan battles, where games can be quite drawn out and extended, dealing damage that is fully healable, unlike the citadel damage of the Hakuryu's armor-piercing dive bombers, or just the raw massive alpha damage, which is more likely to immediately kill someone, of the Midway's HEDBs. These level bombers and rockets, which deal kind of middling damage, you can expect these level bombers, for example, to deal anywhere between about 5,000 to 15,000 to 20,000 damage on a good strike. There just isn't really enough of a payoff to justify the unreliability of the level bombers here. They do have a pretty good fire chance at 40% per bomb with 16 bombs, but if you remember, the Midway's bombers have a whopping 71% fire chance full build, dropping 6 bombs, which means you almost always score fire. You can see that you can see the 57mm strength deck of the Yamato's central plating, shattering the vast majority of my bombs there. Did manage to score 2 fires nevertheless, thanks to hitting him with 11 or so bombs, but that did not go that well. Sorry about that, getting a call in the background. So I'm gonna have to decline that, and while I decline that, it seems my bombers only managed to score 2 hits on the Buffalo because he's small, which is honestly fairly normal, but at the same time fairly disappointing. So even against a cruiser target where I basically just pen him if I touch him, I was unable to get a full damage strike just because, one, the angle was a bit off. It's hard to get a good angle with that huge reticle against a maneuvering target. And 2, it's just the reticle is so large that there's a huge amount of RNG in the aiming of the reticle, or aiming of the reticle onto the target, which means you can get a high variability with your level bomber squadron, and variability is not what you want as a competitive pick. You want consistency. Going after the Richelieu, and the Richelieu is a battleship-sized target. He's in a narrow cove, fairly static target, similar to, say, a Moskva or a Stalingrad that is backed up into an island position. But, however, unlike a Moskva or Stalingrad, the Richelieu is actually covered in 32mm plates, which means I can actually shatter him if I hit him with bombs. Unfortunately, you can see even against a target that's completely static and a relatively good drop reticle, I only landed 4 out of 16 bombs, or 4 out of 18 bombs, sorry, that I dropped onto him, which meant that I did not get great coverage. This time I'm going to be launching 12 bombs only, but you can see launching a third less bombs, I actually land 1 more because of the RNG nature. RNG says yes, so I get some bomb hits. But if RNG says no, then, well, you can potentially get 0 bomb hits, so yeah, it's kind of a big deal not to be able to consistently guarantee hits onto the target. A Midway, for example, can probably guarantee at least 3 out of 6 bombs at all times, which is about 9,000 damage. And if you're lucky, you can get even more than that, so it really is a matter of consistency. So you can see that Richelieu is pretty backed up into that corner, which means I can't really hit her with these torpedo bombers. I'm going to glide out away from the Georgias and dug in position. Considering where I want to go, I think what I'm going to do is actually hit that Georgia on the nose. Thanks to the converging nature of the torpedo pattern, I can actually make some nose-in hits. It's a little you can still do the same with the Hakuryu's 2x6 setup with her paired off torpedoes, but it's quite a bit easier, as you can see, with this converging pattern. And the tankiness of the torpedo bombers helps as well. Do unfortunately clip a torpedo, And oh, I missed partially because I clipped a torpedo. Probably should have taken a wider turn to get the broadside of the Georgia. But the tanky planes means I can take my time on a turn. He's reversing, and you can see because of the responsiveness of the planes, I can kind of turn after they've locked themselves in, and hopefully score some hits this time. However, due to the Georgia's speed, not able to do too much to him there. There's quite a force of the enemy amassed on that border. I'm gonna see if I can finish off some targets here, but you can see because I'm dot damage focused, well, I'm having a little bit of trouble. This Richelieu is kind of tempting to hit, but I think I'll stick with the Georgia because he's a bit further from Allied AA. After hitting the Richelieu, I would dive out into the combined AA of 4+ enemy ships, so obviously not ideal. Georgia moving slowly forward from the looks of it, so I'm gonna get a pretty good drop. And because he's American, I get full damage onto him. I have 41 mils of penetration. His thickest deck armor is more or less 38. So I can take my time and get some good hits in. Got a, I believe, double fire there, was it? But I'm really going for raw alpha damage to finish off this kill. Both a hack and a midway would have no trouble guaranteeing that kill, but even with him at only 8k, I had no guarantee of getting that kill there because, well, I'm an Audacious. We do, however, manage to secure the kill. The Richelieu is creeping out into the cap. I launched my torpedo bombers, gonna try and harass him off at this point. My carrier hull is on the run. Richelieu looks like he's gonna try and hug the corner and move down. My carrier gets some hot shots chunked at him. And there's a midway dive bomber coming after me, but I'm not too worried. My hull is inferior in armor compared to the other tier 10 carriers, but not that inferior, relatively speaking. Looks like I am going to actually be putting fire into this cluster here, so I'm pre-dropping. Now with this many ships, I am going to actually need 6 planes in spite of my tanky planes because I don't have that much health to work with. The vast majority of my teammates are on the other side, other flank still, so. Fast moving Venezia here, but he does not appear to be responding. But remember, my torpedoes are fairly slow. I would show you the drop, but I don't want to lose extra planes. I want to try and get that last plane out. He's managed to score a flood on the Venezia, but he turns away quite easily, thanks to the maneuverability of the Venezia. Having scored that fire, normally I'd go back with rockets, but my rockets are just as slow as the those of, or they're just as slow as these level bombers more or less, so I might as well bring the weapon that could potentially inflict more damage. I say potentially, of course, because, well, they are going to be very RNG, and the Venezia is not a battleship-sized target in spite of my battleship-sized reticle. You have to give him a lot of lead. Venezia is very fast, and I have that 3-second delay timer. Do manage to score 4 bomb hits, but no fire, and I am after a fire. Briefly spotted by planes, and I take some damage. Still after that fire. Probably still only going to make 1 strike. The Venezia does have several parts of his ship which are more than 28 mils in terms of armor, especially in midsection. Someone else does finish him off, however. Or was, yeah, okay, that's the other Venezia I'm looking at, apparently, so. Now I just have these guys. Someone helps us finish off the hitter, which is good. Looks like because the enemy team is chasing in such a manner, I am actually going to get some pretty good hits off. This guy's sitting fairly still, fully expecting to maneuver from his position, however, so I'm going to go with the torpedo bombers in spite of his corner position. But you can see here, even in this rather favorable game, I'm not able to finish off too many kills by myself. You can see me stacking up a lot of damage, but in terms of finalizing kills, which is a key role of a carrier in a competitive setting, the Audacious is sadly not that great at it. I can go after this Bismarck, but again, I'm held back by my slow speed even with this lightning fast talent activated because I have the legendary captain Andrew Cunningham, which you cannot in fact activate inside of clan battles. You can see my sortie time is quite extended. My hull, on the other hand, took quite a bit of surface fire there, and For the other two carriers at that kind of range, you wouldn't expect them to take too many hits, but because I'm more softly skinned, as we'll go over in port, compared to both the Midway and the Hakuryu, I have an inferior armored deck. I tend to take a lot more damage. Gonna force the Venezia into a turn. He's probably gonna dodge out, pop my heal here, but because my squadron is so small, the heal's not that impressive. Force him into a turn, however, but I'm only probably gonna have 2 torpedoes left. I have to give him a lot of lead because of how slow my torpedoes are. I'm gonna stay on screen this time, see if I can get them to hit. I do manage to arm and get both hits, which is good. No flood, however, and because of the relatively low alpha, each torpedo hits for just shy of 6,000 compared to about 9,000 damage per torpedo of the Hakuryu. It doesn't end up dealing that much damage even after kind of all that effort. If you will recall, you can see that only 1 plane made it back, so I lost 5 planes to inflict just about 10,000 damage onto the Venezia, which is not exactly impressive. The alpha damage of the entire squadron of the Audacious is, give or take, roughly 15,000 by 3, so roughly 45,000 damage. If you compare that to the Hakuryu's torpedo alpha per squadron, that's 2 by 6, so that's 12 times 9,000. You can kind of get the idea where it's a 6-digit number, so more than twice that of the Audacious. And even the Midway, with her 5,000 damage per torpedo, launches 18 torpedoes total. So again, that's roughly, give or take, an alpha of 5,000 by 6 per wave, so 30,000 per wave. And you multiply that by 3, so even the Midway has about 90,000 torpedo alpha over the course of the whole squadron. So these are all theoreticals, however, so you don't usually get all that damage off, but nevertheless, you can see the Audacious, even though she has an easier time aiming due to the converging reticle, you get a overall decreased alpha. Usually you'll get 2 passes off if you bring a full squadron, which is about 30,000 damage if you land them perfectly before mitigation. Whereas perfect damage of 2 Hakuryu squadrons before mitigation would be, give or take, 18,000 by 2, 36,000 already, and then you would still have 4 theoretical spare squadrons. So in effect, even though these torpedoes are much more precise and they have good handling that allows you to do stuff like this and turn at the last second and respond to maneuvers, because 1, they're slow, and 2, they don't hit that hard, you can end up with pretty poor torpedo damage over the course of a match. And you can see, in spite of them being quite a bit tankier, they're not that much tankier to the point where you can get an absurd amount of damage off. Now obviously I misaimed that last strike onto the Venezia, so we're gonna have to settle with this 169,000 damage, but you can see most of my damage just came from bleed damage from fires that stuck rather than raw alpha. Used quite a bit of every munition, probably should have landed a few more torpedoes than usual, or than this listed here, but overall, even in this relatively easy matchmaking, there were several points where I bullied tier 9s and tier 8s, which have less armor than a tier 10 would. The Audacious kind of showing off the weakness of her overall slow planes. The tankiness of the individual planes themselves doesn't make up for the weakness of speed, and the relative inflexibility of her munitions. You have to be very specific about where you target ships. Anyhow, 169,000 damage, 7 torpedo hits, 43 bomb hits. But of the 43 bomb hits, 9 were shatters. All 9 came from 1 single strike on that Yamato, you'll recall, where he took 11 bombs and he shattered 9 of them. 1 hull shoot down, 2 incaps, 1 kill only, 10 fires, 2 flooding ribbons, 10 spotter ribbing, 73 target hits at rockets. Mostly penetrations this time, but most of them did come from shots onto cruisers. If I targeted any battleships with rockets, expect a lot more shatters, and 5 planes interdicted by fighter. Team score wise, sitting at only 17,000, a lot of my damage in spite of the high total came from battleships, so that is unsurprising, so I'm 4th from the top. I will nevertheless take it. And if you go to the raw damage distribution, you'll see that I lost quite a few planes over the course of the match. The regeneration time on the Audacious is also not excellent, but mostly in this game I'm lucky enough to get mostly bomb alpha, but remember this bomb alpha can vary highly. If there would have been Stalingrads and Moskvas in this game instead of, say, Buffaloes and Georgias, then I would have had to expend my bombs on ships which could shatter a large amount of bombs, and I would have seen strikes more similar to that on the Yamato. You can see I dropped 9 bombs on him, and he took 990 damage, which is, shall we say, not ideal. You can see 45,000 of my 170,000 damage came from fires. So remember, this is all healable. So overall, the Audacious is just too inflexible to really compete, especially in a specialized competitive setting like clan battles, where you want to maximize your performance. The Audacious just doesn't quite keep up. In addition, her regeneration times are fairly poor. You can see 74 for the rockets, 89 for the torpedo bombers, and 84 for the level bombers. I would say even though they are technically tankier because they're also slower, they are about the same durability as the Midway's planes. So comparable regeneration as the Midway's Bearcats. However, just slightly longer for the torpedo bombers, and significantly longer regeneration times for the dive bombers. And the Midway, unlike the 16, 16, 16 squadrons of my spec of the Audacious, has 16, 16, and 20. So she does have the advantage of 4 extra planes. In addition, the Audacious is also inferior in terms of armor layout, unfortunately. So the other carriers have what is called a uniform armored deck. So you can see the upper armored deck here for the Midway is a uniform 87, which completely shatters all of Midway rockets and Midway dive bombers, as well as Audacious rockets and dive bombers and hack rockets. Same goes for the Hakuryu. The Hakuryu has a uniform 95mm armored deck. The Audacious is also an armored carrier just like them, however she does not have a uniform armored deck. Instead she has a very, very thick central deck plate of 102 mils, which can't be penned by anything, just like the other two. However, outside of that, in a rather large zone in the midsection, you have this 38mm deck, which is penned by Midway rockets, Midway dive bombers, and your own level bombers. And at the extremities, it's 25 mils, which is penned by everyone's HE everything. So overall, in terms of carrier versus carrier combat, well, the other two carriers are mainly take damage only from torpedo bombers and rockets to the side, which is relatively mitigatable. The Audacious can basically take damage from all squadrons, as long as you know how to aim, because even a Hakuryu, which doesn't have HE except on his rockets, can just aim for the front and aft or the superstructure tower, just like as with everyone else, and they will absolutely wreck your day. So the Audacious overall, in spite of being the armored carrier at the top of the armored carrier line, ends up being somewhat ironically inferior in armor protection. Now upgrade wise, before we go, Airgroups Modification 1, Aircraft Engines Modification 1, and then in slot 3 I'm right now taking Aerial Torpedoes Mod 1 because the torpedoes on the Audacious are just so slow. Getting the extra 2 knots is actually quite worth it. TBM is unnecessary due to the fast aim time of the Audacious, and Attack Aircraft Mod is generally speaking just unnecessary overall. In slot 4, pretty usual spec, you take your bomber HP because, well, your torpedo bombers have a heal, and attack aircraft aren't really worth buffing that much. Ideally, you want to stick to using the bombers and torpedo bombers to inflict the majority of your damage. Slot 5, remember your deck space is fairly low, 14, 14, 14 by stock, and so taking the extra deck space is actually quite relevant, especially for your long regeneration times. So that's my spec there, and then your planes are slow, so taking extra speed seems like it would be worth it. However, remember these are percentage based bonuses, so you have high health and low speed, so therefore it's better to min-max by buffing the higher stats. So I take Aircraft HP or Air Groups Modification 2 in slot 6, straightforward. Captain wise, I'm using Andrew Cunningham. This is my Cunningham Audacious spec, so I take my standard 9 skills. So Air Supremacy, Torpedo Bombers, or Torpedo Acceleration, and then Aircraft Armor and Survivability Expert. Follow this up with Plane Speed. Your planes are slow, but you do want to just get them as fast as possible nevertheless, so Improved Engines and then Demolition Expert. This leaves you with 5 points. You can put them wherever you want, but I choose to put them into Concealment Expert because the whole Concealment by default is horrific. You can see with Concealment Expert I get it down to 12.9, so without it it's sitting at roughly 15.3 kilometers if I recall correctly. So I find Concealment Expert to be very useful, so just so you can take some advanced aggressive positions. And then last but not least, my last point goes into Last Gasp. However, if you don't want Concealment Expert, you can put it into sight stabilization, it does help speed up the aim time of the level bombers. But I find it to be unnecessary, especially because the torpedoes and rockets already aim very, very well on the Audacious. Anyhow, that was the Audacious. Definitely very capable in random battles, as you saw with that 169,000 damage victory, but also kind of limited in terms of her alpha potential and also her carry potential. So as a result, she does end up in last place amongst the carriers for competitive and clan battles in the upcoming season, unfortunately. So if you only have the Audacious as your carrier, well, I would suggest trying to grind towards Midway or Hakuryu. You can use her if you want to, but do note that versus the competitive mainstays of the Stalingrad and Moskva, you are going to have some problems dealing damage to them, especially with those level bombers, which are both unreliable and can easily be dodged by targets which are moving. The torpedoes are quite good, they lack damage, but otherwise everything else about them is perfectly fine. And the rockets are quite excellent, but only versus light targets, so they're good versus destroyers and lightly armored cruisers. So again, Moskva and Stalingrad will resist much of their damage, which again makes her somewhat limited in a competitive context. So I hope that was helpful, and this gave you a brief overview of the Audacious. Definitely a fun carrier to play, and a fine pick for randoms, but not my top choice for competitive. I'll leave you all here, and I'll catch you all later. Cheers!